This video is the third one in the whole series about pfSense and UniFi routers migrations or transitions. The first video in the series is about the environment initial setup, and the second one I talk about the firewall rules methodology. You can find them in my channel. This is the third video. Let's start the firewall setups. In the first video, we already set up the VLANs for all the three environments for pfSense, USG-Pro, and UDM-Pro. They have the same VLAN settings and very similar network topologies. In this video, we are going to talk about how to set up the firewall rules for the LAN, IoT LAN, surveillance LAN, and admin LAN so that they can properly communicate with each other and with the web. For the guest network stuff, we are going to leave it to a separate video. Let's get started. On the screen, you see four windows. The top left one is for the slice. This window is for pfSense. This is USG-Pro. This is UDM-Pro. First, you don't want unnecessary internet access from outside of your home to your home network because your router will be the guard for your home network. So here on the window, I show four different VLANs for this video, and from internet the only way they can go into your home network is to access your router. Bad guys can try to hack into your router. A very important thing is to secure your WAN. Fortunately, out of the box, for all the three routers, if you don't change anything, the default settings for WAN is secured. In this video, we are not going to set up VPN. We are not going to expose any ports, doing any port forwards. We are not going to set up, let's say, reverse proxy. So there's no need to expose any services, any port to outside the world. Let's validate it. Here on the screen, I already show you the WAN IP for the three different routers. You can find it out by yourself. For example, for pfSense, on the dashboard screen, you can show the WAN IP address, and for USG-Pro, it's showing on the dashboard page as well. For UDM-Pro, the same thing. Here, let's show a Linux machine, and then let's try to access your WAN IP. So the way to try to hack into your home network may be using the nmap command, and here I'm using the pfSense WAN IP as an example. Let's see what will happen. It's blocked from outside world. It cannot find anything about your WAN IP. Let's try the USG-Pro IP address, which is 194. Same error. Then try the UDM-Pro. Okay, so as expected, all the three WAN default settings, they are good. You don't need to change any default firewall rules. You don't need to add anything. They are secured already. But you may say, wait a second, are you sure you're using the correct method? Let's validate it. Let's use the pfSense as example. Let me go to the firewall rules. So as you can see, for one, there's no rules configured. By default, it's already secured, but let's try to add one. Let's say I add a firewall rule. I pass any to any, right? So that's the wide open firewall rules. Apply changes. Now let's see what will happen if from outside your home network, if you try to use a map to access your WAN IP. Okay, it gets response and it has four ports open by default: SSH, DNS to HTTP or HTTPS ports. That's the result if you open the access, because you are open up these four ports to the outside world and your IP is accessible. So from outside, people will know, okay, this IP exists and it's accessible. Apparently that's not secured. That validated, okay, by default, all the three routers works fine for one. Let me delete the all-to-all rule. We are good with the default WAN setting. Let's move on. Now let's talk about the first VLAN, the LAN network. For each router, by default, the system comes with a default VLAN, the default LAN setup. Normally, many of your computer's devices by default, they will first appear in this network. So that's important to make sure it works. In our testing scenarios, we don't want to limit the access for this VLAN too much. The only thing we want to make sure is for admin VLAN, this will have our sensitive data secured devices. We don't want other devices to access. So that's why you only see one red arrow here. For all other accesses to any other VLANs, to internet, to gateway itself, it's allowed. Let's see how we make sure it happens for the 3 different routers. By default, you can see slightly different setups, but basically they work the same way. For example, for pfSense, you have the default anti-lockout rule, and then for IPv4, it's allow any to any, which means it has wide open access by default. And for UniFi routers, for all the rules which start with 6, they are generated firewall rules. Why they are here? Because I added the different VLANs, 20 VLAN, 30 VLAN, 40 VLAN, right? For USG-Pro, you see one additional one for VLAN 3. This entry is here, but it's not in UDM-Pro because for USG-Pro, it has 2 LAN ports. So you can set up 2 physical LANs. This was for the additional LAN. So it's out of scope for this video. You can simply ignore it. So this is LAN in. For LAN out and for LAN local, they are all the same. If you are still confused about in out local, you can check my another video. I talked about the firewall rule methodology. I won't take time to explain that here. Now let's start with pfSense. In the first video of this series, I talk about the initial setup. For example, for pfSense, I used this UniFi switch. I connected with 4 different Linux virtual machines, and I set the port profile properly so that each Linux virtual machine will be connected to each individual VLANs. So we have 4 VLANs here. You see 4 different Linux virtual machines. This one is for LAN, this one for IoT, this one for surveillance, and this one is for admin VLAN. Let's first make sure they have the proper IP address. Okay, the first one, .1 IP address, and the IoT one has .20, surveillance has .30, admin has .40. Exactly as what we want here. We are good about the VLAN. We make sure different Linux comes from different VLAN. Now let's validate whether we have the desired access already. Let's say from LAN, this Linux is for LAN, right? I wanted to be able to access internet because in pfSense here, the LAN has all-to-all access. I assume without doing anything extra, I'm able to access internet already, but let's validate it. Let me ping Google. Yep, it's pingable. We are good. Let's try another one. Let's see whether it can access surveillance. So for surveillance, I have this IP address here. Let me try to ping it. 30.100. Yes, it's pingable. I'm good about this green one, right? Then I assume this red one is, for now, it doesn't work as expected. I'm still able to access admin, but let's try it. For admin, it's .40. So let's ping it. Yeah, as expected, I'm able to access the admin VLAN. That's not good. Let's see how we can set up the firewall rules to prevent it. You have the all-to-all default access already, and you simply add one to prevent this access. Click the add button. Let's say block, because we want to prevent the access, and the interface is LAN, good, and it's IPv4, good. For protocol, please make sure most of the time you may simply want to say any, because by default it's TCP. It may cause a lot of troubles. After troubleshooting, you realize you simply didn't change the protocol. So make sure it has the value you want. For this case, because I want to prevent all access, of course, the protocol is any. And I don't want to change source because for any LAN IP address, I want to apply the same rule. For destination, make sure you select the admin network. I'm good. Save it. Apply changes. Okay. So this red cross appears here. You may notice it appears automatically after the anti-lockout rule. That's the magic for pfSense. pfSense makes sure the anti-lockout rule is always the very first one so that it can really anti-lockout. And you may also see this new block rule. It appears before the allow any to any because the way pfSense execute the rules is from top down, right? So if you put this prevent rule after the any to any, then it won't be effective. Okay, we have this rule ready. Let's make sure it's working. So let me execute the exact same ping. Okay, it's blocked. It cannot access the admin anymore. As you can see for pfSense, the setting is very easy. Let's move on to UniFi router's firewall rules for the LAN network. I'm going to use USG-Pro as example because for UDM-Pro, it works exactly the same way. On the screen, you see different layout. This is for the network controller for USG-Pro. And in the bottom, you see 4 terminal windows for the 4 different VLANs. Let's see by default what we have. Remember, we want to achieve this effect for LAN. Basically, LAN has access to everything except for the admin VLAN. In UniFi routers, the firewall rules are distributed in different tabs. It's a little bit confusing. If you are interested, you can check my previous video. So let's check the LAN in and LAN out. You can see there are already 5 rules there for in and for out. Where they come from? If you read the name carefully, you can see they are simply for the different VLANs we set up. So every time you set up a corporate network, UniFi will automatically generate rules. They start from 6. They were automatically generated. You cannot edit them. You cannot delete them. By default, it's allow or. Let's validate it first. For example, from LAN, let me ping admin. From the admin terminal window, we can see the IP address is here. From the LAN, let me ping it. Okay, it's pingable. This part doesn't work as what we expected because by default, UniFi allow all to all. There are different ways or methodologies, if you will, when setting up firewall rules. I like the pfSense approach. Even though I'm setting up UniFi routers, I'm going to follow the pfSense methodology or best practice, which means I will only configure the rules in the in tab whenever it's possible. I do not want to waste my time in the out because in most of time it's not necessary. The second thing is by default I want to block all. Then I will see how I can open up the access step by step if it's needed. So sometimes, especially for LAN or for admin network, it might take more time to set it up because by default you want to block all, then you need to open up all the green links, right? So yes, in the beginning for some VLANs, it may take more time, but apparently the end result is more secured and it's more manageable in the future, in long term. So if you want to know more details about methodologies or best practices, please check my channel. So here I will follow that methodology. From LAN, now we can access admin. We want to prevent that. Let's block all because here we are mainly talking about private networks. All the 4 VLANs, they are private networks, right? By default, out of the box in UniFi, there's no easy way to refer to the private networks. So let's create one first. Go to Firewall, Groups, create one for the private networks. I'm showing you the private network article from Wikipedia. It's defined in RFC 1918. We will simply use this CRDR mentioned here for the 3 entries. Let's simply set up the private network in UniFi. Create a new, name it as RFC 1918. For address, let's add the first one and add another one and the last one. Okay, we are done. So here we have the private network defined. Let's go back to the IPv4 rules. We want to create a new rule where we want to block all. Here we want to say drop all protocol. For source, we want to say from RFC 1918 and to RFC 1918. So basically, we want to block the back and forth traffics between private networks. Let me click save. Automatically, your new rule is added above the existing rules. That means they will have priority. That's exactly what we want. It will block all. Let's try the same ping from LAN network. Let me ping admin again. Okay, it's blocked. That's good, right? But the side effect is I cannot ping other networks anymore. For example, from LAN to IoT, I expect it to be working, right? But let's try it. It's blocked. It's not what we want. After we add this block all, we need to open up the accesses which we want. Let's open up the LAN to IoT. Create one. I will change it to accept all protocol, all states, and then the source I will say network, and from LAN, and then the target I will say network IoT. Save. It's added after the block all. That means it won't be used at all because the first one, block all, has the priority. It will be effective, and then this new one, it will simply be skipped. How to resolve it? Just move it to the first one. Then this one will be evaluated first. It should work now from LAN to IoT. Let's validate it. Ping it again. The reason that we still cannot ping IoT successfully is because of this block private networks rule we just added. So first thing is, don't be confused about the tab name. It's called LAN in. It has a LAN in the name, but we happen to have a VLAN, which we name it to LAN, right? This LAN is not the same LAN. So basically in the UniFi world, it simply group all your private networks in your home to the LAN tabs. All the LAN IoT surveillance admin VLANs, their firewall rules are in the LAN tabs. So this block private network will apply to all the VLANs, including LAN, including IoT. So which means, yes, according to the first rule, you can successfully start the ping traffic from LAN to IoT, right? No problem. But when IoT try to reply back, the traffic is blocked by the second rule. That's what we want to resolve. To resolve it, it's very simple. We simply want to allow the established traffic. Let's do that. Create a new rule and we say allow established and related traffic. Okay. And here we say allow all protocol. And here for states, we only select the established and related. So you can answer the existing traffic, but you cannot initiate new traffic. Okay. And the source, we want to say any to any. Save it. So now we added the allow established, but pay attention to the sequence. It's following the block all. It won't be effective. So we need to manually change the sequence. Now let's ping IoT from LAN again. Okay, so it takes some time. Now it's active. We disabled this one, which is good. We enabled this one, which is good, right? Because we can do the similar thing to surveillance. I will skip those steps because it will be the same. So you may think we are done for LAN, right? There's one small thing, because here we don't allow LAN to connect to admin, right? But remember, admin VLAN, it has its own gateway. And for UniFi, the gateway access and your non-gateway access are separated in different tabs. So for gateway access, you need to configure the firewall rules here under the LAN local. But let's see whether now from LAN we can ping the gateway for admin VLAN. Let's first try it. So I know the gateway has the 40 IP address. .1 is the gateway IP. Let me ping it from LAN. I can still ping it, which is not good, right? I'm not supposed to connect to any machine within the admin VLAN. To resolve it, we need to do something in the LAN local tab as well. Similarly, first we want to block all. Then we want to open up the green ones. Let me do that. I won't show you the details. I will only show you the end result. Let's see what's the end results I set up for LAN local. If you check Ubiquitous online document, you will see for LAN local, the default rule, which is not shown here on the UI, is accept. So that's why initially you don't see any rule here. Everything is allowed. I follow the methodology of best practice that by default I want to block all. So here in the end I have a block gateways and I say drop all. See here, I didn't indicate any destination IP address. I even didn't bother to create a groups for all the gateways of different VLANs. The reason is all the rules in this tab will only apply to the traffic targeted to the gateways, right? Even here for destination, I say any. In real world, it can only be applied to the gateway IP address. So that's why here I simply say block any to any, which means no traffic is allowed to any gateways. But about that, I enabled 3 access, which is LAN to the IoT, surveillance, and itself's gateways. So that's why I have 3 rules here. One thing I want to mention here, when you manipulate rules under the LAN local tab, please be very cautious because it's not like pfSense. By default, it has a anti-lockout rule. So no matter wrong rule you define, you can still access pfSense. You can still have chance to correct it. But when it comes to UniFi routers, if you manipulate anything wrong under the LAN local, you may lose access to the firewall or router itself. To resolve that, you have to reset your router, which is very troublesome. So please be very cautious. For example, you do not want to first define this block all rule, because once this one is provisioned, you will lose access to your router. So this is the tab for LAN local. So let's first see whether from LAN we can access the gateway for admin. Let me ping the gateway. Okay, I cannot access it. Good. Let's see whether I can still have access to my own gateway, right? Okay, I can do it, no problem. Let me try IoT. Okay, I can do it. It's all good. So now you may wonder, after all the settings, are you still able to even access internet? Let's try it. Let me ping google.com. Okay, I can access it. As you can see, it successfully resolved the domain name to IP address. So that means DNS also works. Let's go to the LAN in again. I only blocked private network. And for access to internet, it's still allowed here. For my LAN VLAN, it will accept all, which means I can still access internet. I can still access my gateway. So I have access to everything about internet. So as you may notice, under the LAN in, I also added one rule of allow LAN to surveillance, or the same setup as this LAN to IoT. So I won't waste your time. So far we are done with the LAN setup for UniFi routers. Now let's move on to next VLAN IoT. Let's start with pfSense firewall setup for IoT network. From this diagram, you can see most of the accesses should be forbidden. For this type of setting in pfSense, the default block all best practice will make the setup very clean, very easy. Just like in UniFi router, we need to create an alias in pfSense. We will use that to represent private networks. Let's do that. Firewall aliases. Let me name it RFC 1918. Type, you need to select networks. From the right side, you take the 3 cedar blocks and let me input them here one by one. These are the 3 ranges. Let me save it. Apply. Now we have an alias. The setup in pfSense for IoT network is relatively simple. Let's create one rule. See the diagram. We only want the access to internet. We already created a alias for private network. So basically what we want to say is simply, as long as it's not private network, we are okay. We allow the access. The easiest way to define it in pfSense is to create a rule like this. Let me say pass and any protocol. And in the source, you say IoT network. And in target, you say alias. Here you type the first letter, then you choose the alias we just created. And then this is the magic. You say invert match. That means a not condition. As long as it's not private network, that means the internet. Apply. Let's validate it. This is the IoT Linux. Let me try to ping other network. For example, the LAN. No, I cannot ping it. That's good. Then let me ping internet. For example, 8888. Okay, it's good, right? It seems we are done. But wait a second. Let's try more. Let me ping google.com. It doesn't work. Why? Because this is a domain name. You need a DNS service. But this rule blocks the private network. Keep in mind, the IoT network's gateway is also within the private network, which means this IoT cannot access its own gateway. That's why it cannot get the domain name resolved. So we need to correct it. Let's add a simple rule to allow the access to its own gateway. Let's say pass all protocols from this IoT network to here. I want to just say one single host, 20.1. You may say why you don't select this one, this firewall self. Because if you select this one, it will get access to not only its own gateway, but also the other network's gateway. I don't want it. That's why here I only say its own gateway. Save it, apply. Let me try to ping internet, google.com. We can access it. Good. Then let me try to ping its own gateway. Yes, I can access it. Good. Try to ping other networks gateway. For example, LAN networks gateway, right? I cannot, which is exactly what I want. We are done with the pfSense setup for the IoT. Now let's move on to UniFi routers. Because of our work in the LAN setup, now when we set up IoT, it's much easier. We have the block private networks already, and we only enable the LAN access to other private networks. If we don't do anything, IoT shouldn't have access to other private networks. Let's try it. From this IoT Linux, let me ping LAN, for example. Okay, I cannot ping it. Good. Then let's see for internet whether I already have access. See, there's no rules here. And in UniFi world, for when out, the default rule, which is not shown on screen, which is accept. I know it's very confusing, very difficult to remember. If you're interested, again, check my another video. I talk about how to find out the hidden default rules. So without doing anything, IoT should already have access to internet. Let me ping 8888. Okay, I can ping it, no problem. Let's ping google.com. The same thing, I cannot. The same reason as in pfSense, because I blocked the access to private network. The IoT network cannot access its own gateway. It cannot resolve the DNS domain name. We need to resolve it. Go to LAN local. Similarly to LAN, we create another one for IoT. Let's say allow IoT to gateway. Accept all protocol, all states. The source is network. I choose the IoT network. And the destination is just one single IP address, which is the gateway for the IoT. Okay, save. And here it's created after the block gateway firewall rule. To make it effective, we need to change the sequence, move it to the above. Then we are good. Let me ping google.com again. Not effective yet. Give it some time. Okay. Now I can ping google.com. Let's try the gateway access another time, right? Let me ping its own gateway. Okay, I can ping its own gateway. Then let's try other VLAN's gateway. Let's say the admin VLAN. I cannot, right? Super good. That's exactly what we want. Okay, we are done. Because of the LAN network setting preparation, we are so easily done with the IoT setup. Let's move on to surveillance network setup. As you can see, basically I do not want surveillance network to access anything. Someone may argue for your camera to get firmware upgrade, you may want to access internet, right? But on the other hand, I do not potentially allow the cameras to send my home's videos to anyone else on the internet. Of course, you may have your own choice, right? So you need to decide your firewall rules differently. Let's see what we need to do if I want to achieve this. By default, in pfSense, for a VLAN, it doesn't have any firewall rules generated, and by default, it will reject anything, which means that's already exactly what I want. It cannot access other VLAN, it cannot access internet. So let's validate it. I'm in the surveillance network. Let me ping, let's say, IoT network. Let me check the IoT network's IP address. 20.100. Okay, I cannot ping it. That's what I want. Then let me try to access internet. 8888. No, I cannot. Good. Try to resolve a DNS domain name. google.com. No, I cannot. Good. Without doing anything, it's already what I want. But you may worry, okay, wait a second, whether it will still get IP address, whether it will still access the DHCP server. Yes, it's still possible, because here for this surveillance Linux, you can see it get its own IP address. It can communicate to this VLAN's DHCP server without any problem, even though I don't have any firewall rules. For DHCP, it uses broadcast, so it will never be routed. So your firewall rules don't apply to DHCP request. You don't need to do anything. Your client will still get IP address. In pfSense, we are done. Easy, right? Now let's see how we can set the surveillance network up in UniFi routers. If you check the existing firewall rules within LAN in tab, you may find out that it seems the only missing rule is from surveillance to internet, because based on the current setting, it is still allowed. Let's validate it. This is the surveillance network. From this one, let me try to ping other VLAN first. Let's see whether I can access admin network. From the right, I can get the admin Linux IP address. I cannot ping it. Good. Try to access internet. 8888. I can still access it. I don't like it. I want to change it. Let's create a rule within the one out tab. So now there's no rule, which means everything is allowed. Let me create one. Let's say block surveillance to internet. Drop all protocol, all states from network surveillance. Destination, I want to say any, because this is the tab for one out and the destination is the one. Okay, before we try this one, let's see whether from other VLAN we can still access internet. For example, from LAN, let me ping Google. Yeah, I can still do it, no problem. Try in surveillance, ping 8888. Yeah, I cannot do it. Good. Let me see whether I can access the gateway. As we discussed in pfSense, we are not worrying about DHCP because it's broadcasting in nature. Basically, I do not really need to access gateway, but let's see whether we can still ping my own gateway for surveillance. Yeah, this is the IP address. I cannot ping it. That's good. Now let's move on to the very last VLAN setup for admin. Let's start with pfSense. I'm in the admin tab for firewall rules. By default, there's nothing. That means all traffics are blocked. To enable all of them, it's super easy. We simply add a path, protocol all, and source and destination, we say any to any. That's it. Apply. So then admin should get access to everything. Let's validate it. This is the admin Linux. Let me ping Google. Okay, that means it can access internet, it can access the DNS, ping LAN. Yes, it can access it. Let me ping, let's say, IoT. Yep, no problem at all. So we only add one rule. It allowed everything. So if you have concern whether this new rule will open up some backdoor so that whatever we set up in previous steps won't work anymore. For example, for LAN, we don't want LAN to have access to admin, right? Let's validate it. This is the LAN Linux. Let me ping admin Linux. Yep, I still cannot ping it. Whatever you change here doesn't impact other tabs. Okay, so we are good with pfSense. Let's move on to UniFi. And for UniFi setup, it's also very straightforward. Remember, for LAN, we created multiple rules within LAN-in to allow the LAN access to other private networks, and in the end we block private networks, right? And if we don't do anything, admin cannot access any private networks. You may think, okay, when the system create the admin VLAN, it already added this rule, as you can see here, 6005. It allow any to any. And why not we simply reuse this one, right? But the problem is it's generated rule. You cannot move a sequence. So basically we want to create a same one so that we can change the priority, the sequence, so that it will allow any to any for admin. Let's do that. Create new rule. Allow admin to any and accept all protocol, all states, and the source I want to say admin, and the destination I want to say any. So here any means not only private networks but also internet. We create one. The default sequence is in the end. It won't work, and let's move it ahead of the block all rule. We should be good now, but remember, for LAN local we also block the gateway access for anything. If we do not change something here for LAN local, let's see what will happen. We just added the allow admin to any to LAN-in, but we haven't changed anything in LAN local yet. This is the admin Linux. Let me ping google.com. I cannot do it. Let me ping 8.8.8. Yes, for internet we can already do it, and let's see whether I can ping other private networks. Let me try whether I can ping LAN. Yes, I can ping LAN. Whether I can ping IoT. Yes, I can ping it. It almost can do anything. The only thing it cannot is to resolve DNS because it doesn't have access to its own gateway. It's blocked here. So let's add a new rule. Allow admin to gateway. I will say accept all protocol or state. And for source, I want to say admin. And for destination, this is for the LAN local tab. So I don't want to restrict destination because here NA means just the gateway. Save is in the end. Let me move it before the block gateways. Now I should be able to resolve DNS domain. Let me try to ping Google again. It's not effective yet. Give it some time. Okay. So now I can access it. If you ping its own gateway, it should be pingable. Okay, good. So we easily achieved the all green access in UniFi. Okay, so it's a long video, but to show you the different ways to do the setup to achieve the same effects, I have to go to the details. Okay, thanks for watching.